Good morning, everyone. How are you today? Good? Wonderful. So happy to see so many of you. I know a lot of you enjoyed the party last night, so thank you for coming so early in the morning and looking so awake. We also have to thank the wonderful DJ set I was listening to from the back. It surely helped me relax before I come on stage and tell you a little bit about research and integral mental health. But first of all, I want to take you on a little journey to look at the brain. Okay? How many people here have studied something related to psychology? So I can read the room. Okay? A few? Wonderful. All right. Hopefully I can tell you something new also within our field. Very well. So our journey through the brain actually can look a little bit like this. So for a second, I would like for all of you, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes. Close your eyes, relax in your seats. Just listen to my voice and imagine that you're sitting on a plane and you look over the window and you see some beautiful green patches, some brown ones of dense matter that you can guess more or less it's a forest, right? With a beautiful sight, imagine now that you're a scientist in the 19th century and you're trying to understand how that complex system works. That is the same issue that we had when we wanted to understand the brain. We looked at it from above, we saw that it was a continuous dense matter, and that's how we came up with reticular theory. We thought the brain, okay, this wonderful organ, it complies to some function that help us with our health and well-being, but also a lot of other things that keep us alive. Very well. You may open your eyes if you haven't done so yet. Now, by looking at an adult forest, we may see it looks like this. But imagine now that you're a curious scientist. Let's take a trip to Spain. It's 1905, and Ramón y Cajal, one of the most prominent scientists at the time, decided to study a young forest. So imagine that you visited your parents 10 years ago and you saw this forest coming about, all beautiful and green, and you come back 10 years later. The forest will have changed. So what do trees and forests have to do with mental health? Within a forest, there are beautiful units, our trees, that don't just exist as a unit. They communicate among each other. And by studying that young forest, Ramón y Cajal found out that just like a forest, the brain has single units that communicate among each other. They send electrical signals that comply to the function of the brain. Very well, that was shocking for the time because they came up with a new theory, the neural theory, that is the one that we still use today to understand that our neurons, which, by the way, you drew by hand, just by looking through a microscope, which I found was quite amazing. If you come to Madrid, you must go see this. These neurons actually contribute the communication of different brain areas, the organization, and they shape the function of these different brain areas. Very well, but these areas don't just work as little chunks of forests or of units. They actually communicate among each other in a network. So the neural forest in our brain works as networks of regions that communicate among each other, and they help our mental health and brain function. We have about 86 billion neurons that contribute to this function. So just something as simple as right now, you're listening to my voice. There's auditory information coming through, and we believe that that's instant. We hear, we understand, we are present in this moment. But it's actually a lot more complex because the information has to go through so many different layers. The first information gets to the deepest part of the brain. In that area, we recognize what type of information it is. If it's music, if it's semantic information, and then it has to go through different stages until it eventually will reach our consciousness by reaching the activity of the top of the brain, our cortex. So the trick here is that not all of the information that comes in will go to our awareness, our consciousness. Nonetheless, all of that information contributes to the most important brain function I will tell you about today: change. Our brain, that at first was thought to be this dense matter that was capable of function but not of change, actually is capable of learning and shaping. It's plasticity function, we call it. And that means that the next time somebody tells you, this is just the way I am, please do not listen to that. It's absolutely false. We are capable of change if we're guided in the right direction. And this is what I've devoted my career to, trying to help people make that change. So this is a picture of me being very excited about the brain in my first day as a neuroscience master's student. And as you can see, full of excitement. I actually was quite surprised, because when you hold the brain, the first thing you notice that it's actually a lot smaller than you might think. It weighs about 1 kilo. And the second surprise that I had is that the rest of my studies would actually be focused on the brain. So the brain in mental health so far has been key to understanding pathology, to understanding those mechanisms that guide emotion, cognition, and also when I became a clinical psychologist in my training, the brain was again the center of understanding psychological symptoms and how to help our patients. Well, I was lucky enough to study in one of the best teaching hospitals in the world, at Harvard University in Boston. Beautiful city, very cold, like here, I suppose, but we're enjoying some sunshine these days, as our speaker was saying. And while I was there, I came across one piece of information, one piece of research that truly shaped my career. This did make a change in my learning. Unfortunately, 1 out of 2 patients who access mental health services do not improve. They do not improve significantly. That means they can have relapse, that these symptoms might change to something else. And as a clinician, who you can imagine at that time had very little sleep to try to learn how to best help our patients, this piece of news for me was quite upsetting. And as a researcher, finding out that this data had not changed in the past 50 years, in spite of all of the advancements in the neuroscience and the new digital health that we're seeing now, well, this was even more upsetting. So instead of throwing away 10 years of studies, I decided perhaps a better approach would be to research more what might be the missing connections that we were not addressing in the field. And see, back to the forest. This forest is a complex dynamical system. We might agree that the trees talk among each other and really shape the way that it grows. But it doesn't just communicate within the system. It also communicates with its neighboring regions. So I began wondering, what is the brain connected to? Why are we just looking at the brain if we know that there are other connections that are important? So to understand the full picture of mental health, we cannot separate the mind and the body. If we look at those regions, the neural regions that I was telling you about, those connections, the networks from the brain communicate with the rest of the body, the endocrine, the immune system. This is something that we know, but in clinical practice, we address them separately. Doesn't seem logical, right? But the past 50 years have been carrying out this way. Then again, there is something even more interesting. Remember I was telling you about the auditory information, so I'm talking to you and the information takes some time to get into consciousness. We also have information that doesn't reach our consciousness. But there is something interesting when we look at emotions. Emotions first reach the deepest part of the brain, the limbic system, that also controls bodily functions. That means that our body feels our emotions before they come into consciousness. Does anybody have kids here? Yeah, wonderful. Then you know what I'm talking about when I tell you the kids don't tell you, oh, I'm feeling angry. They say, I am angry with all of their body, right? My 4-year-old nephew doesn't say that, he shows it. So children know that, they show it in their body. As adults, we try and suppress that showing of the body, and so we have that delay between when the emotion arises and when we become aware of it. Why is this important? As a clinical psychologist, I can tell you that for our patients to be able to, and for all of us really, to detect the emotion before it reaches our consciousness, when it already presents itself in the body, it gives us the opportunity to regulate it, so to make it manageable, before it increases its intensity. So perhaps something that we should learn, all of us really, I put myself there too, is to recognize the emotions in our bodies. We have some time, so I would like to try an exercise if you feel comfortable doing so, okay? So please do close your eyes again, if you feel comfortable. Sit on your chair, and now just imagine for a second the face of a loved one, a person you have very deep feelings for. It may be a child, maybe a parent or a spouse, maybe your best friend, somebody you haven't seen for a long time. And imagine their facial expression whenever they see you, when they're telling you a joke, when they're laughing, how the specific wrinkles on their face manifest when they're really experiencing pure joy. Imagine the hug that they give you and how that feels to be close to them in their presence. Those of you who are more accustomed to this type of exercises might even notice a specific smell or sound accompany this imagination. And now I ask you the question that always shocks my patients. Not what emotion do you feel, but where. Where is the emotion in your body? Can you notice it in your chest, in your hands, in your throat? Can you notice a deep sense of relaxation coming from the shoulders or your neck? Perhaps some more for those of you who had a massage this morning. Very sorry I missed that. So as you can see, with this short exercise, we can bring our attention to that part of the awareness that doesn't reach our consciousness, the awareness of the body. And this is important because our bodies do know the emotional response before the mind does. And don't just take my word for it. There are actually new paradigms in neuroscience that are showing and studying the connections between the brain and other organs and systems in the body that actively contribute to our mental health, our digestive system, or our lungs for our respiration, or our heart. Embodiment theories actually have come along in the past 10 years in research, and they show that my posture right now, the way I'm standing when I'm giving a presentation, actively contributes to my emotional response. If I'm like this, or I'm not feeling very confident, well, perhaps my posture might show this way, or it might be the other way around. There is a very nice quote that says, people don't always cry because they're sad. They might just be sad because they cry. So the body has a very important role to play here. And then we have perhaps the most evident research, as some of you already might know about, which is the brain-gut microbiota axis. This connection between the brain and our digestive system, this shows that our diet, but also the way that we eat, actively contributes to our mood. And that is for all of us, when we're eating in front of our laptop, or with our phone in our hands, or when we had a really stressful meeting and then we go for lunch, well, that might not be the way to digest our food afterwards. And so the new paradigm that we finally get to, that I want to tell you about, is integral mental health. Finally, after all of that research, I was finding that enthusiasm again that you saw in that first picture in my master's studies. And this is because we see that mental health exists on a continuum between our habits up to the possible development of pathology. And to understand how people move along this continuum, we must address the connection between our brain and our body. I'll give you a practical example from the newest research in this matters. They actually come from leading teams in the UK and Australia that have been pioneering in testing whether exercise is actually good for our mental health. We know that it's good for our physical health. If you speak to any doctor, they will be absolutely recommending you do physical exercise. But what about mental health? So by physical exercise for mental health, we mean a structured form of exercise. So this has been found to reduce depression and anxiety, and I think we can all agree that after a nice training session and a long run, you can really experience that dopamine rush, right? And I wanted to look at the brain and why this happens in the brain. And it is because 60% of our neurons are devoted to movement. And physical exercise actually increases that thing that I told you about before, our neuroplasticity, so our ability for our brain to change. How hard it is for my colleagues here, the psychologists, how hard it is to get a patient to first change their habits, right? And especially when we're dealing with very hard symptomatology, like depression, for example. That change in thinking patterns, that change in habits, is very difficult to do. So what if we could first increase, give it a very good bump at that brain plasticity before we get on to talk therapy? Very well. So what's the best type of exercise for mental health? Studies, meta-analysis, which are studies of many studies, have actually shown that high-intensity interval training, which is the alternation between very strong bursts of exercise and short rests, is the best one at reducing symptoms of even the most prevalent disorders, such as depression. And something that is most striking, I did look at that research several times, but I couldn't believe it myself, is that exercise is actually more effective than antidepressant, even in major depressive disorder, which is one of the hardest ones we have to treat. I still had the gut feeling that something was missing, so I started to look at the gut itself. In the gut, we find trillions of bacteria and fungi and microbes that constitute what we call the microbiome, right? So the obvious function of this is digestion, but also immune response. But now we also know that this contributes to our mental health. Follow me here, because we come to more biological terms. So, if you look like this on a Monday morning, with a sad face, well, we should probably also look at your diet. It might not just be because it's Monday, right? So in the gut, we can digest food and turn it into what we call neurotransmitters. That are the packages, there are neurons sent to each other when they're communicating in the brain. And actually, foods like fish, like seeds for vegans, and like cheese can be turned into tryptophan. And tryptophan is synthesized into serotonin. And I'll tell you also that no sleeping app will be helpful if you don't have enough melatonin in your system. So perhaps we should also look at diet interventions. And then again, if you're finding this talk quite boring, or you're feeling really tired, you can't be bothered learning new things today, it might not be my fault, and it might not be the party's fault. It might be actually a lack of tyrosine in your diet that comes from beans, whole grains, and legumes. It's something that we don't tend to eat much of. And then again, if your team meets on a Monday morning and they're really hungry, well, what we've found is that when we're hungry, we tend to have a negative emotional response. And that is because the deepest brain connection, we find it in the indole-3 lactic acid that is synthesized in our gut. And this contributes to serotonin and GABA, our fight or flight response. So perhaps, like my team, you might want to have your morning meeting over breakfast. So I hope that by now there is a clear connection between food, microbiome, and how this turns into feeding our brain with our neurotransmitters. And the type of practical application of it doesn't just extend to the general population. So for you and I, for many people in our surroundings, maybe having a plant-based, Mediterranean, but mostly varied diet would be enough. But for people with depressive symptoms or for clinical populations, there are actually specific dietary interventions that have shown to reduce those symptoms. And this is a striking piece of evidence. We know that disorders like depression have the highest prevalence, they're the most disabling disorders in mental health, but also they're the ones with the highest relapse rate. So if we can provide a dietary intervention that actually keeps remission for our patients after 3 months, well, perhaps it's something we should be considering also as psychologists. So the question is, how do we apply it in our daily lives? And research comes in handy here, because multimodal interventions are now become a pioneering approach to promote this integral mental health. So I would like for you to try something this week, which is the Learn, Experience, Think, and Share approach. This is a validated clinical method to improve your mental health with a multidisciplinary approach. So hopefully by now you will have learned something new. I would like for you to experience it this week. And don't just experience it by doing it, but really pay attention to the benefits that it brings into your life. Note how it improves your physical health, your mental health, your mood, and your social relationships. And to make sure that these changes are long-lasting, you must share it with your families, with your friends, with your communities. And with this, we've seen that not only we can reduce depressive symptoms, but also anxiety and stress, so common mental health issues, but also we can increase those positive ones like vitality and life satisfaction. So I hope we can all agree now that mental health is multifactorial. It's not just to be found in the brain. But then again, what is not measured cannot be improved, and what is not improved is always degraded. And as a clinician, I know how hard it is to actually bring this into clinical practice, right? We barely have any time to address all of the psychological symptoms in our evaluations. How can we evaluate everything and provide those tailored interventions? I heard somebody saying once that the psychologist of the future will also ask about a person's diet. But my question as a psychologist is when? When can we do that? So how can we direct patients to the right services? As a clinician, again, I tell you that we need an instrument, we need a system to be able to screen our patients in their integral mental health, in the multifactorial aspects of it, both at screening, but also during monitoring of our interventions. And for that, we need big data. We need big data on habits and on pathology in several health domains, such as psychology, nutrition, physical activity, but also, really important, a person's social context, because not everyone will be able to provide that type of diet or exercise or time to these type of interventions. And so, if we manage to do that in this field, we can finally provide the same thing that in medicine they've been having already for decades, which is precision medicine, right? So in that way, we can provide personalization, specific treatments, prevention, and maintenance of those improvements. This supposes a change of paradigm in our field. And I believe that artificial intelligence in this case is what can provide this precision mental health by doing large data processing, clustering with algorithms for prevention, and increasing that treatment efficacy. Precision mental health has to include a unique multifactorial screening and a visualization of it for the patient to provide an active role, but also for the professional. And that way, we can provide a fast triage processing that will decide which treatment for which patient. And furthermore, we need to, of course, monitor how these changes are applied over time. The good news is that some teams, like ours at Medea Mind, are already carrying out this change of paradigm that is finding improvements in clinical efficacy. And finally, integral mental health is what we need to find the right treatment for the right person at the right time, and I hope you can start today. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a few minutes for some questions. So if you've got them, please go to Vote No I Am, checking them out here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You got a bunch of stuff to talk about. Straight up, real quick one, straight up and down. Yeah. Do you drink coffee?
I do drink coffee. Not this morning, though, because I know that before giving a talk, my heart rate is already doing enough. Not before events that are already hiding my physiological activity, let's say. But coffee is not bad for you. It's bad for a person who suffers from anxiety symptoms, perhaps, but it's not generally a bad drink to have within moderation.
Okay, within moderation.
Of course.
I don't know if you all noticed from my opening spiel, I had a lot of coffee this morning. So, okay, so it's certainly there. Someone talks about recommending the Huberman Lab podcast. Yes, I've listened to Huberman as well. That's a good one. I want to go to some of the things, questions I have. I'm going to go back to my points here about Estonia. So it seems like you're going very holistically. You're looking at the whole body. And if I understand your company, Medea Mind, what you're trying to do is track data points, not just from psychology, but health, the whole thing, and then you put so many more data points about a person. Put it all in there, let the AI work it out, and is that sort of where you guys are going with this?
Exactly. So we do that at screening, but also at monitoring to guide treatment. So we provide a second opinion to the professional who doesn't have time to screen the patient on all of these variables that are important.
Okay. It would seem odd to me if a mental health professional didn't ask about diet. That would be weird, I think, if you didn't yes, some things can improve, like maybe some yogurts and fermented things and some good old hapokapsas or something like that can help you do that. But even things like, do you eat 5 donuts a day? That's another way of looking at it. Yeah. Tell me about, let's go to the Estonian example, this darkness that we experience. So what do we got for 6 months a year? We've got cold and we've got dark, and those two things play into each other. So the dark has an effect. Now the dark has a mental effect, right? You just don't see the sunlight. But then there's this other effect, because when it's dark and cold, you don't want to exercise, which then compounds all of those other things again. Can you speak a little bit about sort of this Nordic experience that we've got here?
Absolutely. It must be worked from a motivational standpoint, because actually not exercising might be the thing that increases that sense of distress. So if we can work it around in a way of, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to lower this distress? Then what tools do I have? Perhaps today is exercise. Perhaps another day is connecting with my family and friends and having those social activities, that bonding that increases that well-being. So the idea of this is not that everyone has to do all of these things, but more so understanding what treatment for which person. So that personalization, that if you're a person who doesn't love exercising, we can't get you to do a HIIT session, not right away, but we can find something different. That's why group-based activity for patients especially is the one that is recommended, because that way, that social bond, that social component is the one that increases the likelihood of sticking to the treatment.
And by group, do you just sort of mean any, like, could be a club, could be a social group, could be family?
They're meant to be specific, clinically designed types of exercises in groups, but also group activities like in a gym, for example, that would also be working. If you have to get your shoes in and go running in the cold by yourself, it's probably less likely that you'll do it.
Oh, God. Okay, we got to move on because someone made a long spiel at the start and pushed the whole calendar off for the whole day. But can you tell us a little bit about, okay, we know the foods we shouldn't eat, but tell us a little bit about, I've been reading about the mind-gut connection. I read that book, and tell us a little bit about the foods that can improve mental health, not just like healthy food to have.
Of course. So the thing about nutritional psychiatry, which is this new movement that looks at the food that helps mental health in clinical populations, not just in healthy populations, is still ongoing research. So we're starting to understand what food interventions might be best. So the two things that should be applied are the most varied diet, so using as many different ingredients in your diet as possible, just to vary, because the microbiome is made of trillions of different organisms, so each one of them likes a different thing. The idea is to feed all of them to keep them at equilibrium. So variety is number one, and the second part is a mainly plant-based diet, so increasing the rate of food that has high fiber, such as vegetables, such as fruits, and also lowering animal fats. That's a thing that has been tested with the most scientific evidence. And the third one, especially for people with symptoms of depression, probiotics and prebiotics foods, so fermented foods, have been the ones that have the highest research right now supporting dietary interventions.
Actually, you may be preaching to the converted, because up here in the north, it's all about the pickled food.
I know.
It's all about
I've been loving it.
It's not hard to convince all these people to eat a pickle or something like that, which I ain't doing, but okay. Cool. All right, anyway, we are out of time. Sara, thank you very much for your time. One more round of applause, please.
Thank you.